pigs.
If you're looking for me, you better check under the sea, 'cause that is where you'll find me, underneath the sea.
Welcome to Water Damage with your host, Gil Mancha. This is my chronological discussion of the King of the Seven Seas, Aquaman. Disclaimer, I will be actively getting and collecting issues as we go, and I'm trying to only cover issues that I have a physical copy of or are in a collected edition. I'm going to try to stray away from digital because I love physical media, but the DC Universe Infinite app would be a great way to keep up with the podcast. Be sure to hit the follow button on Spotify or preferred platform to get episodes as soon as they drop. While you're there, please leave a review so the show can be recommended to other comic book fans. If you play Injustice 2 on Xbox, you can join the official guild, Water Damage Podcast ID 0JMD4. There, our community can play games of Injustice 2, which is currently free on Game Pass. Regardless of who you main, you're welcome to come in, play, or just chat. Follow the Twitter or X account at Water Damage Pod to see when I go live. We can chat and play some games. In today's episode, we're covering Adventure Comics 272, The Human Flying Fish. Links will be in the podcast notes. According to LeagueofComicGeeks.com, this issue was released on March 31st, 1960. Let's take a look back at what else was happening that day in history.
Do it again!
The top of the music charts on this day in the US was still Theme from a Summer Place by Percy Faith, and in the UK was Running Bear by Johnny Preston. The top of the box office was still Ben-Hur. Popular TV shows include Gunsmoke, Have Gun, Will Travel, 77 Sunset Strip, and Bonanza. If you were a child or a teen, you'd be watching TV shows like Heckle and Jekyll, The Rough and Ready Show, The Adventures of Spunky and Tadpole, and Bozo, the world's most famous clown. Popular toys include Bass-Ket miniature basketball, Play-Doh, Metal House robots, and Play Pal dolls. We've already covered Theme from a Summer Place and Ben-Hur in previous episodes, so since you're keeping up with the podcast, you've already heard about them. If you're interested in hearing all the times Ben-Hur was referenced in The Simpsons, check out the segment in our episode covering Adventure Comics 269. The UK song is a new one. Running Bear was originally by Giles Perry Richardson, aka the Big Bopper, but the top song is a version sung by Johnny Preston in 1959. The rockabilly or rock and roll tune is considered a teenage tragedy song, which, considering previous top songs El Paso by Marty Robbins and Teen Angel by Mark Dennings, the concept of depressing songs doing well isn't groundbreaking, but apparently a very popular genre. The song is a story about two people, a young Indian brave and a little white dove who's an Indian maid. The two are in love but can't be together because their tribes are at war with each other. As seen with the lyrics, their tribes fought with each other, so their love could never be. There's also a raging river that both separates them physically, but also stands as a metaphor for their cultural separation. The song ends with the two risking it all by diving into raging rivers to unite. They share a kiss, but are pulled down by the swift current and ultimately drown. Now they'll always be together in their happy hunting ground. Richardson was a friend of Preston and offered the song to him after hearing him perform in a club. It's interesting that it happened that way rather than had Preston gone to Richardson for permission. Clearly Richardson was onto something with how well this version went on to perform. Fun fact, Led Zeppelin occasionally performed the song during live shows during rock medleys in the early 1970s. I enjoyed the song. It's got a slow tempo, and it's not performed with a sad tone. You hear about the two having drowned, and you're kind of like, yeah, it sounds like it worked out for them. We've covered Gunsmoke, Have Gun, Will Travel, 77 Sunset Strip, and Bonanza, as well as all the popular toys which are sprinkled throughout previous episodes when first mentioned. The Adventures of Spunky and Tadpole is an animated television series produced by Beverly Hills Productions, and syndication began on September 6, 1958. The show's characters were a boy and a bear who hunted down bad guys. The show was made in 3.5-minute episodes with 10 parts comprising each story. There's 150 episodes, but I didn't see an official way to watch it. You might have luck finding random episodes on YouTube and various other places on the internet. Bozo, the world's most famous clown, is a 1958 to 1962 American animated television series based on the children's record book series Bozo the Clown by Capitol Records. This series was produced by Larry Harmon Pictures, which began syndication in 1958. Lou Scheimer, of Filmation fame, was the art director of the series. There's 157 episodes and they're all named, but I didn't see a quick way to watch them in order. If you're familiar with the songs, top movie, or other events, let me know. On the Spotify app at least, you have a Q&A section where you can reply to my question of what do you think of this issue. You can do it there, social media, or even the YouTube VOD for this episode. While you're there, I have a poll too. What other DC hero would you like to see covered like we do Aquaman? The choices are Nightwing, Sergeant Rock, Blue Beetle, all three we have so far, and Batman Beyond. You can pick as many as you want. I'd love to see what you think. That's a taste of what the world was like when Adventure Comics 272 was released.
That was outrageous.
I'm reading this thanks to Showcase Presents Aquaman Volume 1, but was also reprinted in Super DC Giant S-26 and the Aquaman Archives Volume 1. Just like other issues we've covered here, Adventure Comics is an anthology of stories, and this is the last one behind Superboy. Per usual, it's either middle or last. Nothing's beating out the Golden Boy. We continue the new tradition of going Superboy, Congo Bill, and ending with an Aquaman story. Again, the story is called The Human Flying Fish. Aquaman's gloves are back to being the rightful green color. That said, the Showcase Presents series is in black and white, so if that's your only access to it, you wouldn't know. The story was written by Robert Bernstein, penciled and inked by Ramona Fradon, and edited by Mort Weisinger. This cover Adventure Comics focuses on the Superboy story, so we'll discuss the first panel of the Aquaman story. The Aquaman name is written in red once again because it matches Aqualad's costume and is clearly different from Aquaman's orange. In the panel, we see the titular human flying fish just launch himself from the water and is now skyward, holding a red orb, probably the size of an Earth Dragon Ball. He's got a smile on his face. Still in the water are two octopi, a shark, a swordfish, and both Aquaman and Aqualad, with their arms reaching out at him that look like they were trying to catch him in vain. Aquaman thinks, "I can't believe it, my sea patrol has surrounded him, but he's flying right over their heads. He's like a flying fish in human form." The text explains how a strange new person has arrived that stands to challenge Aquaman's kingship. Not only can he somehow match Aquaman's swimming prowess, stroke for stroke, but he has powers even greater than the king of the sea. This new person can go into the air while Aquaman can only watch helplessly as crimes are piled up by this triple threat villain of the land, sea, and air. The man known as the Human Flying Fish. Since this comic isn't on the DC Universe Infinite app, I can't read you guys the About This Book section. After the break, we'll summarize the issue.
Is Aquaman finished? Can you make it to the bathroom before we return with part 2 of the show?
What it do, guys? Manjame here, and if you like board games, especially deck building games, you should check out @Team_Thunder on YouTube. There we have unboxings and games of Legendary, a Marvel deck building game, the DC deck building game, the Transformers deck building game, and many more. That's also where you can find VODs for this and Accelerated Visions, a Spider-Man 2099 podcast where you can directly leave a comment and we can discuss the issues.
The Superman Aquaman Hour of Adventure, featuring Aquaman, King of the Seven Seas, and your favorite comic book superheroes in their own adventure stories. It's 60 minutes of thrills and fun, next on most of these stations.
The story starts off one day on the Atlantic coast in an abandoned lighthouse. We see a boat speeding by with two figures swimming right behind, while inside the top of the lighthouse are two men. One gray-haired one with a pipe in his mouth and a younger, dark-haired man with binoculars looking on, looking at the speeding boat chase. The dark-haired man says, "There go some smugglers with Aquaman and Aqualad in pursuit. Do you think their speedboat will escape?" The old man answers, "No, Bragg. Aquaman will contact his sea creatures through a strange kind of fish telepathy." In the next panel, we see the younger man. Bragg's eyes widen. "You're right. Dr. Krill, a school of whales is surfacing, blocking the speedboat's escape." Smirking, the doctor responds, "Just as I predicted, Bragg. You see, not only am I an expert on medicine and marine life, I'm also an expert on Aquaman." We see what Bragg's seeing. The speedboat is surrounded by 4 whales, all blowing water out of their blowholes. To the boat's left are Aquaman and Aqualad. One of the smugglers say, "We're surrounded on all sides by Aquaman's whales. No sense shooting it out. Even if we got Aquaman, his fish friends would get us. We'd better surrender." Presently at the lighthouse, we see the two inside looking on at the scene. The boat is now being held up by two whales. Bragg is despondent. There go the smugglers carried off to prison on the whale's back. "We'd better pull our crimes on land, Dr. Krill. You can't best a guy with Aquaman's powers." Holding the pipe in both hands, the doctor responds, "Nonsense, Bragg. You give up too easily." We get a panel outside from the water's point of view, with the lighthouse in the distance. There's flying fish in the air. Krill continues, "All we need is someone with powers greater than Aquaman's. See those flying fish, Bragg? How'd you like to be like them? Able to escape any pursuer by flying into the air." Cut back to the inside of the lighthouse, but for some reason with a plain yellow background, Bragg says, "Are you crazy? How can I perform like a flying fish?" Now with smoke coming out of his pipe, Krill answers, "When I'm finished operating on you, Bragg, you will outperform any flying fish. That's why I brought you here." Presently, outside at the bottom of the lighthouse, we see the two are going down the stairs, with someone near having landed a helicopter in the distance. Krill tells Bragg, "You're an ex-swimming champ, Bragg. With your aquatic ability and my genius as a surgeon and marine expert, we'll run a crime operation that Aquaman can't interfere with." "Okay, Doc, I'll play guinea pig." Early that evening, as Bragg's helicopter overtakes a hospital ship, we see Bragg holding onto a rope ladder of the helicopter while holding a Tommy gun as it's about to land on some ship with a giant red cross painted on the deck. Bragg calls down to the ship, "Slow the boat down, Captain. We're taking over for the night. My doctor pal has to perform an emergency operation." Here's where we get our quote of the issue.
What's the matter, Aquaman?
I don't know. The fish are trying to tell me something.
From the inside of the bridge, the captain says, "I won't argue with a Tommy gun. Come aboard." There's other lines later in the story that could have been quote of the issue, but this one made me chuckle because he's right. I don't blame the captain, and that's the right thing to say because his main concern should be the safety of himself and the crew. Thus, hours later in the operating room, we see Bragg on the operating table, knocked out with 6 people around operating on him. One man says, "I've never seen an operation like this. You're converting this man's lungs into gills." Skip to the next morning at dawn, we see Bragg in a stretcher being brought back to the helicopter. One man in blue says, "Don't worry, Doc, we're handling Vic gently." The doc retorts, "He'll remain unconscious for days, and it'll take months for him to recuperate at our hideout, but the payoff will be worth waiting for." Time skip to one morning, months later, and we see Vic Bragg in the costume we saw on the first panel near the lighthouse from earlier. He's standing on rocks by the water, with everyone else higher up closer to the land. From the distance, the doctor tells him, "Okay, Bragg, we'll begin the tests. Your objective is to swim underwater, then leap into the air and catch a bird on the wing. Like a human flying fish, eh? Here I go." We don't get to see him dive into the water because in the next panel, he's already coming up into the air. Whoosh! Look, Bragg's coming up. He's breaking surface. Bragg thinks, "Great guns, it's working. I'm rising in the air." He's able to grab a bird by the throat. I caught the seagull. Dr. Krill's operation is a success. I'm a human flying fish." From the ground below, the doctor says, "Boys, you're watching a miracle. Get ready to clean up a fortune." Days later, as Aquaman, Aqualad, and their finny friends are out on a salvage job for a steamship company, we see our 2 heroes standing back while 3 people in old deep-sea diving equipment are moving objects. Suddenly, Bragg swoops in and takes a locked box from one of the workers. Aquaman thinks, "Someone is swimming up to that diver at terrific speeds. He's grabbing the cash box." Meanwhile, Bragg's thinking, there's $100,000 inside the strong box. According to what I read in the papers, when the ship sank, just as quickly as he swooped in, he's getting away, going back toward the surface with Aquaman, Aqualad, a swordfish, and dolphin chasing him. Aquaman thinks, he swims almost as fast as I do, without diving equipment. Whoever he is, he's up to no good. I'll signal Aqualad and my sea creatures to close in on him. He won't escape. But when the King of the Sea reaches the surface, we see Bragg has leapt into the air, with the rest of them stuck at the surface of the sea floating. Aquaman says, "Aqualad, do you see what I see?" My sea patrol has surrounded him, but he's flying right over their heads. It's amazing. He's like a human flying fish. They look on at this human flying fish as he jumps along the water's surface to a helicopter's rope ladder and thinks, haha, a perfect getaway. Aquaman couldn't lay a finger on me. Aqualad points and says, look, Aquaman, in the sky, a helicopter is coming down to meet him. Shortly while Bragg's holding on to a rope ladder, he talks to the doctor. Doc, you're a genius. I did everything you told me. I struck fast and then I shot up to the surface and into the air. Man, were they helpless. The good doc responds, I told you so. From now on, we've got nothing to fear from Aquaman. At that moment, from the water's surface, Aquaman grimly gazes skyward at them. Aqualad says, we'll never stop this new criminal, Aqualad. He has all of our powers, plus the ability to fly. Aquaman corrects him. Not all of our powers, Aqualad. He can't command the sea creatures and he can't outthink us. Next time, we'll be prepared for him. A few days later, as Aquaman supervises the raising of an old idol from the ruins of an ancient sunken temple, we see 4 whales with ropes pulling the giant statue to stand upright, with Aquaman and Aqualad helping to direct them. Aquaman thinks, probably a volcanic eruption destroyed the island on which this temple was situated, and it ended up underwater. But archaeologists want to examine the idol to learn what race of people built it. Besides, the ruby embedded in the stone forehead is worth a fortune. But as Aquaman turns his attention to his straining whales, the idol has almost been pulled upright, with that red orb from the first panel glowing. We see the human flying fish holding a stick whoosh in. By the time they recover from their surprise, I'll have pried out that priceless gem. Aqualad still holding the whale's rope. Suffering sharks! That flying criminal is back. He's heading for the idol with a crowbar. 10 seconds later, we see the human flying fish using the crowbar to free the ruby. He thinks, here it comes. The world's biggest ruby. And Aquaman can't prevent my making off with it. Meanwhile, in the background, we see Aquaman and presumably Topo swimming upward with the king thinking, this time I'm ready for any aerial escape. If this character takes off, I'll follow him. Soon, on the surface, the human flying fish has already leapt into the air. Now for another perfect getaway. I'll leapfrog over Aquaman's sea creatures. At the sea surface, we see Topo has a tentacle around Aquaman and is starting to spin him. I don't know how that human flying fish achieves his high altitude, but I sure know how I'll reach the heights. In the next panel, we see Topo increasing speed. Whoosh! This giant octopus is whirling around at terrific speed, faster and faster. Then as the octopus casts Aquaman into the sky with a whip-like motion of its tentacle, whizz, we see that as the human flying fish is making his own final leap, now sees Aquaman coming at him. Aquaman's got one of his octopus pals to whip into the air like a human slingshot. He's coming toward me. As Aquaman's just about to reach the human flying fish, who's holding onto the rope ladder with one arm and the ruby with the other, the king thinks, a few yards more, and I'll net this flying fish. The human flying fish has a thought bubble, but I think it should be a speech bubble, because it says, Dr. Krill, quick, take me up. Aquaman's right behind me. From off-screen, presumably, the doctor says, okay, Bragg, hold tight. We're going up fast. As a helicopter abruptly rises, the human flying fish is barely able to get away from Aquaman, but our hero was able to retrieve the ruby from his grasp. Missed him, but I got the ruby. So I won a half victory. He escaped, but with empty hands. At the same time, the flyer thinks, blast it. I pulled this job for nothing. Yet I should be grateful. He almost got me. Shortly as Aquaman's diving back into the water, while the helicopter's getting away, he thinks, next time I won't miss my target. Tomorrow morning, I'll set a trap from which these thieves won't escape. I'll use a Coast Guard cutter's radio to broadcast a report that'll cause their downfall. The following morning, aboard a Coast Guard cutter, we see Aquaman wearing headphones and using radio equipment with Aqualad and a police officer watching on. He thinks, I'm sure this gang tunes in on all distress signals. He begins to broadcast. Attention, all shipping. Airliner suffering engine trouble just dropped heavy cargo containing priceless uranium to gain altitude, latitude, and longitude as follows. At that very moment, at the lighthouse, we see the human flying fish, the doctor, and other thieves discussing the message. The human flying fish expresses his skepticism. I heard the broadcast, but it might be a trap. Look how close Aquaman came to catching me today. The doctor dismisses the notion. Bosh. Today was an accident. Don't lose your nerve, Bragg. Nothing can stop the human flying fish. Let's get that uranium they dropped from that plane. An hour later, underwater in the fresh water of a large bay, we see the human flying fish holding a box while Aquaman's hiding behind a wall. The human flying fish thinks, Dr. Krill is right. It's no trap. I'm the first on the scene. In a minute, I'll be airborne with $1 million worth of uranium. Peering on, Aquaman thinks the human flying fish swallowed the bait. Now to hook him in the air. But as Bragg breaks the surface and soars upward, Bragg sees a grid appear. Great Scott! Something's rising out of the water. It looks like high-tension wires. Aquaman, right out of sight, thinks, my electric eels timed their appearance perfectly. Bragg's going to fly right into them for the shock of his life. When Bragg gets to the wires, he's shocked. Yee! And drops the box. The doctor sees this and says, Aquaman's electric eels arrange themselves into the shape of poles and wires. Bragg is shocked. Take the copter down. We can't let him be captured. But as the helicopter descends to pick up the human flying fish, we see 4 pointed snouted fish piercing the lower back of the helicopter. Aqualad says, the sailfish are obeying your telepathic commands, Aquaman. They're leaping upward with their sword-like bills to puncture the copter's fuel tank. Aquaman, holding the unconscious Bragg, replies, fine, I knew the crooks would come down to fish their stunned pal out of the water. Soon we see the helicopter crash down into the water. One of the passengers says, curse you, Aquaman. We're out of fuel. We're in the drink where his sea creatures can easily capture us. In the background, watching the crash, Aqualad says, congratulations, Aquaman. Your plan worked perfectly. From now on, this human flying fish and his flight companions will be earthbound. Presently aboard the Coast Guard cutter, with Bragg and the doctor in cuffs and Aquaman, a sailor and an officer on board, we see Aqualad showing the aforementioned box to Bragg, but now opened. By the way, friend, the box you uncovered was empty. Aquaman chimes in, yes, you might say the box was bait, and the human flying fish fell for the bait. Now let him try flying over prison walls. The end. After the break, we'll go over some thoughts and feelings about the issue.
Wait a minute. That was no joke. Somebody tried to kill me. That or we're not paying Mr. Slippery enough. Holy Neptune's trident. This has to be the work of the Legion of Doom. Hey, there's an echo inside my head. Echo. Echo. Echo.
You okay, Aquaman?
Echo. Echo. What? Oh, no problem.
This might have been the most adversity that our heroes have faced so far. In other issues, when confronted with a problem or obstacle, Aquaman comes up with a fix on the spot. In their first encounter with the human flying fish, he actually got away with the cash box. On the run back, Aquaman adapted and got a partial victory by retrieving the Dragon Ball looking ruby. The way he adapted to a foe that can leap into the air by having a big octopus just chuck him into the air was pretty funny. Kind of unga bunga, but it worked out pretty well. Not perfect, but it almost did the job. Now on that final encounter, Aquaman devilishly lured the human flying fish and his crew. Speaking of, it was an interesting crew of bad guys. The brains of the operation was, understandably, the doctor, while the ex-professional swimmer was the brawn. The doc was able to outfit Bragg with gills, which we've actually seen before in episode 14 of this podcast, Superman's Girlfriend, Lois Lane, number 12, The Mermaid from Metropolis, wherein Lois Lane's legs and lungs were crushed, so she had to be turned into a mermaid to survive. But after reading a whole medical library of literature, Superman was able to perform surgery on her to restore her to a normal human being with half the recovery time. I wonder if they're going to ask Superman to revert Bragg as well, or if the human flying fish will become one of Aquaman's rogues gallery. I think it's interesting how prior to being caught in Aquaman's trap, Bragg was saying, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't do it? But it was the doctor that dismissed it and wanted to go through with it. They ended up getting caught, so I think it'd be cool if in a follow-up issue where Bragg strikes up on his own and explains how the doctor was too reckless. Or maybe in an issue where he kidnaps the doctor and forces him to change him back. Maybe since being operated on and subsequently arrested, his quality of life has been a nightmare, and he's forcing the doctor to end that. Since Aquaman has used his spinny friends to create a lattice and make a raft before, hoop and stick game, And even a lamp, I don't think it's really out of character for him to have an electric eel to basically make an electric fence. The aforementioned octopus chucking him into the air isn't very big brain, but having his sailfish specifically puncture helicopter fuel tank is pretty smart. That said, I'd be concerned about the gas getting into the sailfish's eyes or mouth, maybe because their bills are so long that the gas would have to travel further, but by the time they're in the water, it would kind of just clean off. The issue might as well not even have Aqualad. In most of it, he doesn't do anything besides narrate, which could have been done by Aquaman's thought bubbles. Oh, sorry, he does taunt the villain at the end, showing him the box that he was going after had literally nothing in there. One way we could have shown him to be more important in the story, especially early on in his tenure as Aquaman's sidekick, is making him the reason Aquaman is able to beat the human flying fish. Think of it this way. The human flying fish and Aquaman are matched in terms of swimming and being underwater for a long time. Maybe after the half victory, Aquaman thinks he's too wide or heavy. Even though that's not physically true, let's go with that for the purpose of this what-if scenario. So on round 3, he does the trick again, but this time he chucks Aqualad, who's small and aerodynamic enough to reach the human flying fish. From there, Aqualad can handcuff him with crabs, or reveal that the bracelet he's wearing is an electric eel that he launches at the human flying fish. At the end of the issue, where they talk about how the human flying fish could anticipate or counter all of Aquaman's moves, there's one thing he couldn't. Aqualad. Laughter, the end. Okay, I've said this a lot before, but I feel that the final panel should have all the good guys present and laughing. Mostly because Aquaman tends to end his issues with jokes or puns. This is prime time for this sort of ending, because once we move away from Villain of the Week stories and into more serious stories, it won't make any sense to end on a joke. What do you think? Did you read the comic? Did I get something wrong? If I do and you guys let me know, I'll include a correction section in the next episode and I'll credit the user. Let's continue the discussion on social media and the YouTube VOD. You can find me at WaterDamagePod on Twitter or X and at Team_Thunder on YouTube. If you're looking for another podcast to listen to and you want to learn more about the Spider-Man of the future, check out Accelerated Visions, a Spider-Man 2099 podcast on Spotify and anywhere you can find podcasts. Be sure to follow that and this podcast to get episodes as soon as they drop. Mandrame out.
Whew, man. Glad that stopped before things got worse.